Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Courtney Poulos, and I'm a real estate broker in Los Angeles. I've been licensed since 2005. I've been a broker owner since 2011. When I was young, I was raised in State College, Pennsylvania, and graduated high school outside of New York City in New Jersey. And neither of those two homes were what I would call idyllic in an American dream type of way. My mom was a hardworking single mom, and we were always renters. That, when I was a teenager, kind of embarrassed me. I had my friends' parents drop me off like down the street because I was embarrassed of where I lived. I think that's a kind of common feeling, when you're just building your identity. And then the house that I ended up moving into in New Jersey was what we would call a fixer. I had stepbrothers who were kind of wild, and they'd get in gang wars with other neighborhoods' kids, and bricks would fly through our windows. I remember one Christmas we had to huddle together in one room because the windows were all shattered by one of these rival little teenage boy gangs who threw bricks through our windows. So we had plastic on our windows, and we could not afford to replace the windows. It was like a real pioneer experience, like an urban pioneer experience. But there was a lot of love in those homes. That one was not a rental, but it was like owned by my stepmom's mom, and it was right across the street from the train tracks. And every time the transit train went by, the house would just shake. It was wildly like distracted compared to my life in State College. But I left home early and young to go to college, and I always had this feeling like I could make it, just by sheer ambition. I was inspired by 80s Madonna, and I thought if I just worked really hard, I could do anything I wanted to do. And that meant in college working 3 jobs. I was the entertainment editor of University Reporter magazine. I was on the Capitol Hill Women's Political Caucus. I worked at Fenton Communications in PR, and I also was an intern at a reggae record label. I worked as a waitress. I had like so many jobs. And I also was going to college too. So it was like overwhelmed, just like constant workaholic energy. And then I won a big award. I came out to LA to enjoy a 1-month internship that came with that award. And the weather was really nice. And I thought, I'm working too hard. I'm growing up too fast. Let me just wind this back. And I decided to be an actor and kind of throw away that entire bureaucratic life. Fast forward to many years later of many odd jobs and a kind of, average career in commercial acting. I had a few things. I did Days of Our Lives. I did The District on CBS. I was in the first Ford Focus commercial with Rashida Jones. I had like a few little things that, at the time you might have noticed, but now are left to the annals of IMDb. I met my future ex-husband, and we moved to DC, and I got a job working for a federal subcontractor. And this was my version of throwing away the bohemian life and committing to something more serious, so that I could create some stability and some structure. And in that job, working for the federal subcontractor, I was taught a very important lesson that haunts me now to this day. So I was, accustomed to working efficiently. Of course, I had all these jobs. I had to always work hard and efficiently in order to just pay my bills. But my supervisor came over to me one day and said, Courtney, you're working too fast. You need to slow down so that we can bill the government more hours. There was just a major disconnect between the fact that we are the government. I mean, we are the taxpayer that you're wanting to bill more hours. It didn't sit well with me that I was part of the problem, it turns out. Like I was one of the ones working this sham. I mean, the way that it worked, requests for proposals would come out from the government that had like DEI initiatives in them. So it'd say like, we want a minority-owned business to get this piece of work, and that was where I was working. So then there was a department that would create a response that would put people in there that they had contracted to fill whatever initiative. The government was trying to have a minority female with a PhD of a certain race or whatever fill this position. And we had this like database of people we pull from and then put those into the RFP, and they were gigantic, like 200-page fat things that I had to edit and ultimately would get submitted, and then maybe we'd get the work and maybe we wouldn't. It was government meetings. It was like just so intense. This was not the beginning of my distrust of government, but it was my first experience working in the inefficiency of government and the human resources meetings and the way they treated the people like children, like making us make poster boards for our supervisors about the kind of music they liked, like really a lack of respect for the college-educated person entering the workforce. You know, it was like a real insult to my independence that I had achieved over all those years of being on my own, even as a teenager. So I couldn't really handle it. And when that lady said that, I went on Craigslist. I found an assistant position, an assistant to a real estate agent, and I interviewed for the job. And that was what like launched my career into real estate. And I had to work through a lot of, can I do this? Can I do this? At the beginning of it, to understand how achievable home ownership really was, that the forces that supposedly are there against you are mostly people just not understanding what options they actually have. If you can pay rent, you can pay a mortgage. And that was like the beginning lesson for me, is that where there's a will, there really is a way when it comes to home ownership. Fast forward so many years, and especially this week, having watched the State of the Union address, painful in many ways as it was, intentional as it was, it just reminded me of the reasons why I felt so much a longing for a home of my own when I was young, and how important that feeling of place and, you know, identity tied to your roots, to the ground that you walk on really, really actually is. So in this episode of The Clean Clothes, I'm going to go into the State of the Union address and kind of the state of our real estate union too, and go over some of the major headlines that are happening right now, but also talk a little bit about what I think would really recharge our economy, our mental and spiritual health, and ultimately change our minds a little bit about who's supposed to help us when we're down. Welcome back to The Clean Clothes. So Trump gave his State of the Union this week, and for the first time in a long time, he talked about housing in a way that had some action behind it. He brought on a guest, a mom from Houston, who said she placed 20 bids on homes and lost every single one of them to large investment firms that paid cash and skipped inspections and turned those houses into rentals. So his big line was, we want homes for people, not corporations. And then everybody's like clapping forever. If you watched it, you know, the clapping was just intense and ridiculous. Back in January, when he first announced this, and we talked about it on the show, the stock prices for a couple of the big institutional investors went down, namely Invitation Homes and American Homes for Rent. Can I just side note for a second? Are we really doing this? Like last week, I went head to head with an AI written article from the assist to sell with the number 2. Why are these corporations trying to be taken seriously when they replace the word for with the number 4? How can you even take that seriously? American Homes for Rent? Come on. It's like 1877 cars for kids. Come on. But here's the thing. There is currently no agreed upon definition of what an institutional investor, a large institutional investor, even is. Depending on which version of this policy becomes law, you're going to see it affect different segments differently. So it could be like a lot of the things with this administration, which I'm obviously frustrated by, like most Americans. It's like a bait and switch. He's saying what we want to hear, but in the background, there's no actual definition. So few things. On January 20th, Trump signed an executive order directing federal agencies to stop approving, insuring, or facilitating the sale of single-family homes to, quote, large institutional investors. The order did not define what a large institutional investor is. So there was no criteria, no threshold, just nothing there. So it sounds like an empty PR order. So HUD, the VA, and FHFA were given 60 days to figure out how to define this. There were kind of like immediate impacts in the stock market, and people, I think those of us who have been following this story really felt like this could be a good move. We're watching for more progress. But then a few weeks later, the White House sent a legislative memo to Congress, and it said, any investment fund, corporation, or entity that controls more than 100 single-family homes would be banned from buying additional ones. And I thought to myself, okay, so we're basing this on the number of homes. And what if, so what, one entity, like these companies, these hedge funds and private equity, they're more than capable of creating multiple different entities that could each own 100 homes that are still tied to one larger entity. Like, I don't know that doesn't in and of itself create like it looks like something that would be easily jumpable. Let me just say like that. But according to John Burns Research and Consulting, if the 100 home threshold stands, only 6.3% of single-family investors would be affected, which means that 93.7% of investors would be untouched. So by that logic, it's not really effective. So a mid-sized fund with 80 homes in a particular area would be completely fine, and untouched by this policy. Okay, but they carved out in this memo, build to rent is allowed. So the big operators like American Homes for Rent, which owns 60,000 homes, is just announcing that it's pivoting its strategy. So it's just going to lean more into new construction, but still to rent. It's a building to rent. How does that feed the purpose of this, this effort? It doesn't. So the CEO of American Homes for Rent was like, yeah, we're just still trying to figure out, how it's all going to shake out. But it sounds like they're lobbying pretty hard for it not to affect them very much. So then a Republican congresswoman from Illinois, Mary Miller, introduces her own bill with a threshold that says companies with more than $100 billion in assets would be considered large institutional investors. So now it's like the top of the top, I would assume, like that's like the top of the top, right? But is that solving the problem? It says, oh, actually, there's not one company has $100 billion in assets. That's a single family rental company. So it would actually affect no one. So in my mind, when I see $100 billion, I'm like, oh, probably Blackstone has that or something. I don't know, Blackstone, BlackRock, whatever. No one has $100 billion in assets that's in the single family rental company space. So that was complete baloney. And then just this week, 2 days after the State of the Union, you have a bipartisan duo, Republican Senator Josh Hawley and Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley, who just introduced the Homes for American Families Act. Their threshold is any investment fund with more than $150 million in assets, quite different from the $100 billion, is banned from buying single-family homes, condos, or townhouses. It's asset-based, not home count-based, which we like. And that means that a fund that owns 30 homes but has $200 million under management would qualify and be banned from this. A fund structured to stay under 100 homes to dodge the White House rule but has $500 million in capital would also, be affected by it. So it would not just be mom and pop landlords that would be affected by this. I think it hits the target regional operators. So this is what I think the bill's intention was. So we don't know how this is going to land, but we do like that it's bipartisan. And it's certainly something to watch if finally, after having such division in our country, the idea that Congress could be working from both sides of the aisle to come up with an agreement on this, I think tells you what the temperature of the American public is, or at least what they perceive it to be. maybe most Americans don't even really know that this is happening or even understand how it would truly affect them. But I can tell you people in Florida know, people in Texas know, people in Georgia know, people who are actively trying to buy single family homes in areas where the inventory is being purchased by corporations are aware of what's going on. And this really could affect them. So to summarize, there are 4 different versions of this policy currently going around: the executive order that has no definition, the White House memo that says 100 homes, the Mary Miller bill, which is ridiculous, $100 billion in assets, right? So it would affect no one. And then the Holly-McKeley Bill, $150 million in assets. So each version is not finalized yet, but we're keeping an eye on it. And I think that Trump certainly can't claim victory for this, but if bipartisan congressmen can actually get something together on this, I think it would be a huge victory for the American people. So we're watching it. We'll keep you posted. Relationships matter in real estate. If you're watching this, you already know that. That's why I send my clients to Matthew Fine from Blueprint Home Loans. He is super likable. He's one of us. He is hip to what's going on in the real estate market. And honestly, he's creative. He cares about the American dream, and he helps our clients with creative solutions to getting their loan accomplished and getting them into those houses. I love that when you can count on somebody and you know when you're sending them to your client that they're not going to let them down. So if you're looking for a new lender partner and you're frustrated by the ones you've been referring your clients to, give Matthew Fine a call. He is on Instagram at MortgageMatt with 3 T's. I'll also put his contact information in the show notes. Now back to the show. Okay, so while everyone was focusing on Trump's investor ban, so-called, which as we've established is completely undefined at this point, something else is happening and moving through Congress. It passed the House just 2 weeks ago, and nobody's talking about it. It passed 390 to 9. It is called the Housing for the 21st Century Act. And it was also a bipartisan bill. Maxine Waters and French Hill worked together to bring this one to the table. And I want you to know what's in this bill. The Housing for the 21st Century Act, H.R. 6644, is a supply-side housing reform bill. So now we're talking about what can make inventory greater, can kind of spurn some growth, make some movement happen, such that we can offset the high cost of housing with more inventory if it truly is a supply and demand problem. It pulls together pieces of 43 different bills, 27 of which had bipartisan sponsors. The bill directs HUD to create zoning frameworks, like a best practices playbook for the most effective zoning that local governments can employ to allow for more density, smaller lots, more units, and transit structured development. So for some people, they might think that's like a bad thing. In LA, there was recently something passed that said if you're within, I can't remember right now, but maybe a mile of a metro station or something, that the single family zoning can be trumped by multifamily development. And a lot of people pushed back on that. They were not happy with that. So this is, the idea is you're creating more housing supply, but if it's smaller lots and more units per structure, it's creating a dense housing supply. So if that's your thing, then yay. Yeah, but it's voluntary. So the federal government can't legally override local zoning. It's just kind of creating a best practice. This is the government employing itself to create some kind of standardized best practices playbook for zoning. Now, why local governments wouldn't be able to do this if they know what their people actually want is beyond me. Maybe this is just a waste of time. The government loves to waste time. So that could be that. The Senate's companion bill, the Road to Housing Act, takes a harder line. It ties federal community development funding to local housing production. Build more homes, keep your money. These are the two things. But I will say with the California state housing initiatives, there has been actually no accountability If you go online, check this out. I'm going to show you something that's on Instagram. It's pretty funny. There's a $1 million bathroom. $1 million bathroom. What would $1 million bathroom look like? Well, you certainly don't think it's going to look like what it looks like in this clip. Check this out. This is how our housing and construction things are going right now in California.
Here it is, the $1 million bathroom. That's what $1 million of taxpayer wasted money looks like on a truck.
Pretty bad. Pretty bad. So this is what happens when you put all the power in the government's hands when it comes to this. They have people they want to give bids to. Again, just working for that federal subcontractor and seeing how money is distributed and how many people take pieces of the money along the way and how the government's really overcharged for that. This is how you get this type of bathroom for $1 million. There is literally no accountability. And in LA, we've had so many tax initiatives to build housing for the homeless, and they're just sitting there. The cost of construction is 3 times what it ordinarily would cost. They're totally unoccupied, and they produce like not even a drop in the pan compared to what was promised. So do you want to give the government more after a track record like that? And where are the standards for accountability anyway? It's really infuriating to anybody who actually pays taxes. So there's another one, NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act. So the bill exempts a broad range of housing-related activities from this act. So it's been one of the biggest, like, developers complain about the National Environmental Policy Act because it affects even properties that have really no environmental risk at all. So this bill would fast track people. It would exclude certain properties from having to comply with that, especially if they're not ones that pose an environmental risk. This one's a little funny, the manufactured housing provision. So nobody talks about this. I think manufactured houses get a bad rap. We think like, I don't know, mobile home parks or prefab houses that are cheap. But there have been a lot of advances made in prefabricated construction. There are a few things that are great about prefabricated construction. One is that it's assembled in a facility like a warehouse that doesn't get rained on. There's not as much mold. The product can be built to be more environmentally friendly and non-toxic. It can be assembled more quickly, so you can really build housing like faster than stick-built. For decades, federal regulations have required any manufactured housing to have a permanent chassis, which is the foundation that the house is built on. Now, just as a person who lives in a house, I don't mind a permanent foundation. I'm not sure what else you're going to build it on. But apparently that little regulatory thing has prevented a lot of prefab and modular housing from being like more affordable than stick-built housing, I guess. So this bill removes that requirement. And, you know, it could be a big boost for factory-built housing. So maybe that's a place to invest our money. I don't know. And then higher FHA multifamily loan limits. I think this one's great. A lot of my clients bought their first property, especially if they felt nervous about the mortgage. They would buy with FHA loans like a 4-unit and live in one of them and rent out the others, and frequently would become like cash flow positive. And you can build junior ADUs on the back of like multifamilies. So at least in LA you can. So the FHA's multifamily loan limits had not kept pace, apparently. So some of those projects couldn't access federal financing. And so they would increase the limits, making that more of a thing. I'm not mad at that. I think that's great. Another provision involves pre-approved pattern books. This makes me a little nervous, but I guess in LA we have this already for ADUs. So basically the government would have pre-approved plans. Like, here's a pre-approved 3-bedroom, 2-bath home plan. You can build this on any lot. It's ready to go. So you don't have to go through the process of hiring your own architect, hiring your own as-built person, or hiring your own person to draw, architect to draw the plans and take them down to Department of Building and Safety and have them review it and make changes and blah. So it should expedite the building process, particularly for new construction developers, and allow you to build faster. But my concern, of course, is that it's going to end up with more of these like cookie cutter houses, which I'm sure, as you know, McMansions don't age well. People don't really like living in houses that don't have any unique characteristics. So you run the risk of that. And uniqueness is one of the value tenets of real estate, like sight. It's one of the things that you can either add or subtract value. But if you have a bunch of houses that look exactly the same, they all collectively lose value together. But Trump's not 100% loving it. No, he's not. I guess he couldn't claim victory for it. Maybe that's why. But what happens now is that the bill goes to the Senate that has its own version of a similar bill called Road to Housing Act. And they are going to reconcile a few things. And if they get to conference and pass a final bill, then Trump would be able to sign it. So as of now, it's still probably 60 to 90 days out from a final vote. So, it's hard for me to parse out anymore when you look at a year back what we were talking about. We were talking about DOGE, which for those of us who love the idea of accountability in government, one thing I particularly know a lot about from my personal experience and from being a taxpayer in America, I was with it. I honestly was. I know people were pissed. I was not pissed. I'm I worked in government. I know how big and behemoth and nasty that thing is, and how any bureaucracy can crumble under the weight of its own inefficiencies and its own bureaucratic structure. Look at what's happening to NAR right now. It feels like the industry is being castrated, fully ineffective. This NAR needs Viagra, in my opinion. Right now, it's suffering and struggling because of the bureaucracy, because it can't function the way it used to function, okay? And I think the federal government is in that same space, probably has been there for a very long time. So I love the idea of them pulling back regulations, making things easier. If you need a new law to reassemble old laws or disassemble old laws, have at it. But one of the things I learned living in Washington, D.C. and working there is that their inclination is to add more laws to the books without getting rid of the old ones. So if for no other reason that this makes things a little bit easier and kind of removes some of those laws that are strangling our economy and our housing inventory, then let's go. Let's go. And Trump will sign it. I'm sure he will sign it. But he just won't be able to claim total victory for it. And we all know that the institutional investors he's talking about are the same people that fund, the re-election campaigns of a lot of Congress people. So the idea that they would not find a loophole is ridiculous. I don't believe any of that bull. None of it. Another thing that's happening outside of Washington, but kind of not totally outside of Washington as it's hit the headlines, is the Compass Anywhere merger and how the industry continues to respond to the big implications of such a thing. Leo Pareja, the CEO of EXP, which is the number 3 brokerage in the country by sales volume. Very interesting. I don't think they're that huge in LA anyway. I don't see them a ton. But he made this pointed line in a news article: consolidation begets more consolidation. We should be on the lookout for even more consolidation beyond the Compass Anywhere. Now you're going to see other big conglomerates emerging so that they can all kind of counterbalance each other. So Rocket bought Redfin, we know that. Compass and Anywhere, we know that. Okay, Stone Point Capital investing in Keller Williams. Nobody's really talking about that. Stone Point is a private equity firm, and they have made a major investment in Keller Williams so that, Keller Williams could essentially fight back. Gary Keller is on the stage just talking about his idea, kind of poo-pooing away the relevance of the Compass Anywhere merger. But I'm do you really not care, or is that just your PR stance? Because why do you need so much capital then? So much capital that it makes headlines if everything's all right, if everything's just going well. I don't know. Leo Pareja's point of view is that every acquisition creates more consideration of acquisition. For example, mid-sized companies are thinking, should we band together with other mid-sized companies so that we can create a little something that could rival Compass Anywhere, especially if they decide to really go hard on this private listings thing, which all signs are indicating. Again, I talked about it last week. I continue to see this major social media push by Compass agents for private listings in a way that I've never seen before. So I'm like, there must be a lot of mandating going on behind the scenes. I'm just guessing. Anybody who's at Compass wants to chime in and tell me if people are either being mandated or incentivized to push this more. I know that there was recently like an incentive that was really, I don't think it's newsworthy really, but it's like internally they're willing to give a 10% referral fee for any Compass agent who gets a lead that they don't want to work and gives it to another Compass agent. It's like a company incentive. Obviously Compass is a company and it's trying to make money and make its shareholders happy. But just paying attention to the little things sometimes can see where they're like counting their pennies. And if they have to continue to try and push to keep more of the commissions for their company to satisfy their shareholders and make this merger make sense, you're going to see a lot of news stories about little things rolling out. I'm keeping my eye on it, because just today I got a message from a Compass agent who, is maybe not totally happy with what the changes that are happening. It's very interesting to see how this is all going to shake out. So much like I've been saying, the Compass Anywhere deal isn't just about scale. It's about control over the inventory. It's like leverage over the MLS and how the MLS chooses to aggregate the data, the rules that have now been given to the like the police power that's been given to the MLS now, as opposed to NAR, which used to hold all the police power. Now this is like every time they make a new initiative, they're like, we're going to leave it to the MLSs to decide how long delayed listings can be, how long you can have to sell something off market. We're going to leave it to the MLS to implement these rules. And the MLS is not built for it, to be honest. The MLS is it used to be kind of cutting edge. I feel like it's a bit of an archaic system now in the era of AI when we have the opportunity to aggregate in different ways and reward the people who are actually paying the dues. Right now we're in like a bondage system where it has to be this way, but it's the old school and you see sentiment changing. That's why NAR decided to decouple membership from MLS membership, but it's not effective enough. It's not enough. You can't simultaneously decouple and then give MLS all the police power too. It's a little bit of a strange move. It feels like they're just trying to offload liability. His point of view is that, and here's what he says, quote, "The agreement we signed up for is a data cooperative. If a large enough player decides to withhold for any period of time, it will create an equal reaction from another large enough player and another large enough player. And before we know it, we have a fragmented market that is not as efficient as we enjoy in North America to the benefit of the consumer." So kind of like James Dwiggins, like you see these people emerging, these leaders who are speaking on stages saying, we have this. It's one of the best parts about the American real estate industry is our MLS, is the fact that we have this, that it's not all exclusives like it is in Europe and like it is in other parts of the world where people are just scrambling to get access and visibility. Like, we have this beautiful thing. Let's not F this up by making it a nuclear arms race for MLS data. In light of what Leo Perea is saying, what does it mean if you're an agent or a broker owner or a team lead right now? So NAR membership is dropping and always does when the market turns down, but there are like 50,000 fewer working realtors. That's a drop in the pan considering how many licensed realtors there are. The industry is kind of consolidating at the top. So if you haven't already built a business and you haven't already spent your time and energy investing in relationships, then you probably missed an opportunity in this like down market. So you see the people who are succeeding are the ones who have put energy in when other people were pulling their energy out. The platform war is probably going to continue. Homes.com's Andy Florence is still having at it. He's like not backing down. He still believes in the platform. He's going out very publicly saying, listen, even though there are some investors who have their panties in a twist, we're moving forward. Zillow is like fighting to stay relevant, and Compass continues to announce new things that they're going to do and new positions, and we keep an eye on it. Listen, I feel like Refkin's got some good ideas. Like, I kind of love the nationwide MLS idea, as I said before. And despite any of the sound of people pushing back against that, like, well, then who's going to run? Well, who runs our current MLS? Like, these are not well run. So I think we could figure this out. And I think that there's a total moment for it. And I think we should consider that seriously. But a lot of what Refkin does feels kind of Trumpian to me, I'll be honest. It feels kind of like you're saying these things to a willing audience who really wants to believe that you're for the agent. But there's also people who are insiders who say that really it's just about the money at the end of the day. It's just about the money. It's just really about how can I get more of the commission dollars that are being earned in America. And if that's true, then it makes the whole for the industry, PR phase feel disingenuous. And that's just how I see it. So we'll look for more consolidation in 2026, but I guarantee that a lot of companies are not going to go down without a fight. This market is, it's fickle. And, I think in real estate, there's no such thing as too big to fail. In reviewing the State of the Union speech, I started to think about what it is that would actually provide a lot of relief, like where the source of a lot of our frustrations are. As we know, the tariffs, which were meant to supposedly incentivize manufacturing to come back to America and give some leverage and whatever, got struck down by the Supreme Court. And then very publicly, instead of saying, well, we're going to pay back to the consumers, the ones who actually paid higher prices for things, the administration announced that they're going to give it back to the corporations, which that just doesn't sit well. I mean, there's just a lot of things that feel like smoke and mirrors happening right now across the board. I mean, you can't literally get on stage and say, stand up if you believe Americans should be first, and then siphon off American taxpayer dollars to all these little pet projects all over the place while we still have so many domestic problems. And those are the things that you ran on. Now, I'm saying this from a human being point of view. We can't trust the government. We already know that. If you haven't learned that already, that's something I've known for a long time. And I think a lot of conspiracy theorists, so we say conspiracy, but it's really not a conspiracy. I think we're proving everything that people were concerned about to be kind of true. I think people are owed an apology, to be honest. And in places where it was almost like violent and radical defense of federal bullshit during COVID, we really are owed an apology. Some of our friends need to call us and say, sorry about that. I got a little zealous there, eating the federal slop on that one. But I started to think about income taxes and the history of income taxes in America. So I created a little timeline, and I'm just going to share this with you. So really what I want to start at is the 16th Amendment. The Civil War had a little tax situation there, and then there was like an attempt in 1894. But that's not where we really got started with this. So it's interesting. Congress passed the 16th Amendment in 1909, and the states ratified it in 1913. There was a rage at the time that rich people weren't paying their fair share. Sound familiar? So the 16th Amendment reads, Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived. First year was 1% on income over $3,000 and a surtax of 6% on income over $500,000. Less than 1% of Americans would have paid anything under this first income tax. It was literally supposed to be a tax on the wealthy. Isn't that interesting? It was supposed to be a tax on the wealthy. They weren't paying their fair share. Things felt like rich were getting richer, poor were getting poorer. This was supposed to be a tax on the wealthy. And then war. And then war hit. 1917, 1918, the top income tax rate was 25%. But unfortunately, the war spike on taxes went down, but never all the way back down. Apparently at one time, it was 77% on income over $1 million. Can you imagine? The American government had an income tax of 77% on income over $1 million. Now, the over $1 million would have been really, really top dollar income back then, 1917, 1918, if you can think about it. But they rolled it back down to 25%. However, it's still quite a hike from the original intention in 1913, not too many years prior, of how many Americans were having to pay this. So now we're back down to 25%, still on the wealthy, and we're fighting for them worse. But the war is the justification for hiking it. Okay, 1932-36. Hoover raises the top rate from 25% to 63%. FDR raises it to 79%. FDR proposed a 100% tax on all income over $25,000. Congress said no. So even in this scenario, it's still an argument over how much money the wealthy should pay in taxes. But it seems like the ordinary American person was still not as affected, right? Like not super affected. Here's what happens during World War II. The top marginal rate hits 94% in 1944 on income over $200,000, which would be like $3.4 million today. For nearly 20 years, from 1944 to 63, the top rate stays above 91%. And during this World War II moment, Congress lowered the income threshold. This income tax became a mass tax for the first time. So not just a tax on the wealthy now. Tens of millions of ordinary working Americans are brought into the tax base. In 1943, federal income tax withholding is introduced. So now they're taking your money out of your check before you even see the money. So employers are required to take taxes out before they give you the money. That's just 1943. I mean, my mom was born not like just a couple years after that. So it's like not that far in recent history that Americans weren't taxed to death. But withholding was supposed to be a wartime measure, and it was not ever taken away. So now we still have that wartime measure to this day. In the 1970s, there was what they call an invisible tax hike. So the top rate stayed at 70%, but high inflation pushed the middle class Americans into higher brackets. Your wages go up with inflation, but your purchasing power doesn't, but your tax bracket does. So I think we've experienced a little bit of that when you look at how many people you could consider millionaires these days. It's kind of astonishing. Like when I was young, if a doctor would earn like $100,000 a year, that was considered like a lot of money. It was the 80s. But now, there are plenty of people who are making, upwards of $600,000 plus salaries. Plenty of people whose houses have appreciated, and when you put all their assets together, they certainly would qualify to be millionaires, which means they're going to be taxed like millionaires. And in some places like Los Angeles, if you're not making like a millionaire's salary, remembering that you're going to be giving at least a third of that back to the government, probably more, you need to have that much money in order to even be able to live here, like to be able to buy anything, food. It's crazy. So anyway, in 1981, Reagan cut. So there was an Economic Recovery Act in 1981 that cut the top rate. So he cut the taxes on the rich from 70 to 50%. Then there was a Tax Reform Act in 1986, cutting the top rate down to 28%. Now, did they cut programs? Yes, there were programs. I remember studying that. There were programs cut too. So this was supposed to be simultaneous with a reduction in like government programs. It came under a lot of scrutiny at the time. Like there were people who were saying you're taking money out of urban neighborhoods. This is when there was a lot of crisis in like Manhattan. There was things were emerging to fill the gap. Now we understand that some of those things were stimulated by intelligence agencies, but you'd see like crack and like things like that starting to emerge. This was all during Reagan's great tax cut, trickle-down economics. This was coming from the top. I mean, think about it. 70% tax on the wealthy, down to 50%, down to 28%, and then shrink the size of the federal government so that you don't need as much in tax in order to run the programs they decide are important. I mean, we're still talking about this to this day. A 42-point drop in 5 years on the wealthiest Americans. So the promise that was made then was that the 28% rate will never be raised, but it was raised. So in 1990, Bush Sr. famously said, read my lips, no new taxes, but raised the rate to 31. Clinton, 39.6, Bush Jr., 35%, Obama, 39.6, Trump, 2017, 37%, 2025, 37%, and the one big beautiful bill is like extending. So, right now we're at like 37%. Why does this matter? Why does this matter? This is the federal government. So this is like right off the whip. What changes could we make? One is getting rid of withholding, right? Like give us our money first and we'll pay, I think that would be great. But also recognizing that the inflation, I think during the COVID era is like up to 9% or something, that inflation is causing more people to fall into higher income tax brackets. And there's no real federal income accommodation for the cost of living in the areas where you might be living, where the housing goes up with inflation. You might make a little bit more, but the cost of groceries goes up, the cost of private school goes up, the cost of gas goes up. I mean, we had crazy gas prices here that have come down a little, but it's not, we were paying $7 a gallon for gas. We were really paying that. And I was thinking to myself during that time, how the heck is anybody making minimum wage affording this? It's crazy. So, when inflation's reduced, a little bit, softens a little bit, you're still seeing the impact of all of that inflation on our income taxes. But on top of that, we just happen to live in a state where people really think, I don't know why, that the government is the answer to all the problems. So we literally have Gavin Newsom, who took office in 2019, who has been the governor of California over its biggest decline in quality of life for its residents, the biggest mismanagement of taxpayer dollars, in my opinion, overseen some of the worst tragedies in California history with our fires, and is the biggest con man scumbag I've ever seen in my life, taking national stages to culturally, to insult and culturally, I don't want to say appropriate, because he's not appropriating anything, but doing the whole Tabasco in my purse thing, it is insulting and ridiculous to imagine Americans getting behind such a slick used car salesman type dude. I wonder if they felt that way about Clinton when Clinton was running, because he has some of that energy. And he's trying to rival Trump with his his tweets and stuff like that. But he's gross. He's gross, and he's ruined us. He has ruined California. And I hate to think what he will do on a federal level with taxes if he got elected, just based on the things that are happening in California. I was just telling our producer here that every time I go to Sprouts, there's a little station in front of Sprouts that is asking me to sign my name to a petition. I can't believe they even need those anymore. It feels like it could all be fraudulently done anyway, but to sign a petition to give the government more power over, my money. They calling it a billionaire tax, but I'm like, you're not really taxing, you don't really want to tax billionaires. We all know this, because billionaires are gonna get the heck out of here. They're out. So now where are you gonna get the money from? It's like Mamdani in New York. Once the money that you're trying to punish the rich, once they get out of there, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for your free groceries at your government grocery store? It's going to be people who make enough money and pay enough in taxes that they are, that middle class Americans do. We qualify for paying taxes. We are the ones who are going to be footing the bill for all of this. And I am very nervous about it. I think that the biggest relief you could give our economy right now, and the biggest relief you could give our housing industry right now, is to give us our money back. Give me my money back. My understanding right now is that 1/3 of the American military fleet is sitting on the shores of Iran or something like this, preparing for a war that has an unknown outcome. Something that is hugely unpopular. And certainly not the way I would vote for my American tax dollars to be spent if our voice actually did matter. We've given so much to war efforts. We've invested more in the private industries that create the bombs, the weapons of destruction that we're supposedly trying to prevent from being used, but yet we're the ones manufacturing them. Never made sense to me. It all feels like a line. And I feel that we should all be very upset about what's really happening with our country, our military, our elites, our loyalties, our government involvement in foreign affairs. It is worth a lot more scrutiny than I think people are giving it. Maybe it's just too much. Maybe people are just it's too overwhelming to actually internalize. But it's affecting me. It's definitely affecting me. One time though, and this is where I'll wrap, okay? One time I was in Rotterdam. I was singing backup for Roland Bolin, the son of Mark Bolin. We were at this theater in Rotterdam, and Roland's mom, Gloria Jones, famous soul singer, American lady, funny lady, great lady. She sang the original Tainted Love. If you haven't heard the Northern Soul version of Tainted Love, get on YouTube and listen to it because it is amazing. So Gloria, so she's standing outside and this bum walks up to her and asks, this is before EU had its own money, they had guilders or something like this. And this bum asked her for money. And she gave him 5 guilders. I think it's guilders. She gave him 5. And then 5 minutes later, the guy comes up to her again, same guy, and asks her for money again. And she looked that guy in the face and she said, "Give me my money back. You just asked me for money. Give me my money back. I want my money back." And it's funny because I understood, at the time I found it hilarious. She was like, I've never seen somebody ask the bum for the money back, okay? But she was trying to say, listen, I gave you, don't ask for more. I gave you what I had to give, and it's abusive for you to ask for more. You know, I know that you could probably read that situation a million different ways, but the point was she gave what she had to give. And I feel like the American taxpayers have given way more than they've had to give. We want our money back. I want my money back. I don't think there's enough accountability. Having worked for the federal government, I don't trust the government. I hope that their housing policy ends up in taking the stranglehold off of what's happening and give us our money back. We will spend it on housing. We will spend it on food, and we will spend it on our mom and pop stores. We will spend it. Now that we know what's happening with glyphosate and all these other types of poison foods and stuff, I think mom and pops and farmers markets are going to get an uptick in business, honestly. Give me my money back. The wealthy were supposed to pay a tax to win a war. 3%. That's what they told us it was going to be. So how's that working out for you? I want my money back. See you next time.